Kelsey Lodge from Missoula Electric Cooperative in Missoula, Montana. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
NRECA's Along Those Lines podcast is supported by Power & Tell, a company specializing in procurement, sales, and material management of communications products. Power & Tell's supply chain expertise provides electrical co-ops and contractors with a cost-effective and reliable way to get the material they need for their network construction and maintenance.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. The way companies manage their businesses and their staffs had already been changing rapidly before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Since then, the pace of change has accelerated to an unprecedented level, and electric cooperatives have been right in the middle of this churn. Advances in grid and member communication technologies, a broadening desire among staff members for remote work accommodations, a surge in retirements with more to come, and evolving member expectations have made it essential for co-op managers to ensure that the workplace culture they've built encourages open communication, fosters learning and leadership development, and attracts the right new talent to face the challenges of today and those to come. How are co-ops reacting to this tumultuous time, and what facets of the cooperative model are they leveraging to manage this change well? We'll talk about these and other workforce challenges with Tim McCarthy, the CEO at Sioux Valley Energy in South Dakota, and Delaine Orendorff, NRECA's Director for Human Capital Planning. Tim, Delaine, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Okay, so I want to start with the elephant in the room. We're talking about workforce challenges today, and obviously the pandemic that we've just been through has created some systemic challenges for us, some things that we can solve fairly quickly, some things that are going to last for a while. Delaine, can you sort of give us some of the high-level ideas of the biggest impacts in terms of management and staffing at electric co-ops that the pandemic has had across the board?
Well, I think that the pandemic, along with co-op retirements, have created in my mind what I call the big squeeze, because you're kind of getting it from both ends. We've got a lot of folks retiring, and at the same time, we have a lot of folks leaving the labor market. Now, some of those are leaving the labor market because, caregiving for children, they wanting to switch jobs, but there's a lot of retirees too, which is resulting in less supply of labor and, increasing demands. So that's something that we're seeing not only at the cooperatives, but kind of across the United States, is this war for talent, if you want to call it that. And what's interesting is throughout my career, and I've been in HR for over 20 years, we've always been talking about war for talent, war for talent. And I've always kind of dismissed it because I have always felt that previously, yes, you will always compete for the best folks, but there wasn't really this shortage. But the pandemic has created this shortage where for the first time, I feel there really is a war for talent.
And Tim, what about you? What are you seeing sort of on the ground? What are some of the specific consequences at Sioux Valley and some fallouts that you've been seeing?
Well, I'll address it from a couple different angles here. First, we've kind of been through this unprecedented time in the last couple of years, and it's really created this significant turmoil in our industry. We've asked employees to take on tasks that they've never had to before. It's been probably two of the most challenging years of my 34-year career because you just had to go in, you had to think differently. And, at the local level, we had to overnight change a lot of our business processes and really ask employees to think differently. Processes they'd been working on for years, we had to just redesign and make 100% electronic. So, the employees that were there, it really gave them an opportunity to show their talents as far as being able to adapt to change and really their understanding of the business and being able to adapt work processes to still serve our members and serve them well. To Delaine's comments, we've hired 13 employees in the past 2 years. That's 12% of our workforce. And it's been in a time when our employees have been spread apart. We haven't been in the office. We've only had one employee meeting where we're all together in the last 2 years. Typically, we have about 7 a year or so. So the challenge right now for us is to ensure that we not only maintain strong and talented workforce, but we maintain our strong employee culture. And, we're never going to look the same as we did 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we had one remote employee. And now we have 6 employees work 100% remote. We're spread across a large geographic area, and now we're spread out even more because we have people at home. So you're really looking for a talent pool that can not only do the job, but can fit into your culture and be effective in that culture.
And Delaine, as far as what you're hearing from the co-ops in terms of the pain points that they're experiencing in this post-pandemic or this later pandemic time period, what are you hearing from them, and how are you sort of advising them to reposition their policies and their practices in the way that Tim was just talking about?
What I'm hearing now is for certain positions, other companies outside the industry are coming in and they're saying, hey, you want to work for us? We'll let you work remote right from your hometown that you're working in currently.
Yeah, I imagine that's fairly new. I could see sort of in the urban areas, the heavily urban areas, where that might be a thing that new employees ask for. But this must be a totally new dynamic in terms of people asking to work from home and asking for certain accommodations in their work life.
But it's interesting because when you interview candidates, that is like one of the first things they say. And then they're talking about, well, what are the values of your organization? You know, how collaborative is your organization? They're really touching on those culture factors, I think, because they do want to make sure that their values and the values of that particular co-op are in alignment. And of course, they're asking for competitive pay. For some of our cooperatives, they have a number of line workers leaving. Again, IT folks are being hired away for higher salaries, engineers. And let's not forget the member service clerks, because you can see all those signs outside Target, Walmart, whatever, and they're all saying $15 an hour, $17.50 an hour. So that's going to have an impact.
You know, and to counterpoint Delaine a little bit, one of the things that I've seen, she mentioned culture and she spoke of pay. One of the things that I've seen is the development of culture. You don't want to have a culture by default. I mean, everyone has a culture. Not every culture is good. And unsatisfied employees will not produce satisfied customers. So we work very hard on culture. And where we've found our culture to be a competitive advantage is we've found that in this area we've actually developed a reputation for the culture of our organization to the point that we've had people come and join our organization from places where they were making more money and we couldn't match that pay, but they liked the culture and they liked our flexibility and they liked our mindset towards really where we're heading as an industry.
Tim, I know you have been doing a lot of stuff in the cultural area. You talk very eloquently about it, but you have some concrete things that you have been doing at your co-op to foster what you call this passion and this idea that the mission is primary. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been doing that are specifically focused on this culture question?
Sure. You know, we try to start right away. You know, it's been tougher during the pandemic, but when employees come through the door, we try to do an orientation with every member of leadership as quickly as we can. You know, schedules don't always allow it to be in the first week, but we try to do it fairly quickly so that every leadership member talks to them about what we do, how we do it, what our expectations are. I talk to them at a high level. The very first thing I ever talk about is safety, and then we talk about the objectives of the organization and how we go about achieving those and what part do they play in that? And we try to draw that line of sight. You know, it's making people understand how their work matters so that they have buy-in to that objective. We also use a lot of cross-functional teams and committees. As we move forward and we encounter problems, I don't manage top-down. I have a very strong belief that you've got to take that organizational pyramid and flip it upside down. As a CEO, I really am there to work for and support everyone who's an employee there so that they can support the members. I need to make sure they have the vision, they understand the objectives, they have the resources, they have the training, everything they need to deliver that exceptional service to our members. So we try to make sure that's built into the things we do. We use a lot of employee committees. We redid our entire medical insurance coverage a couple of years ago, and we didn't go out as a leadership team. What we did is we took a cross-functional group of employees, educated them on benefits, brought in experts, and then let them help build our new insurance plans. And we implemented those last year now, I believe it was. We also have programs, like we have a program we call One Way, and what that's really about is because we are spread out over several service areas and we're in Minnesota, South Dakota, you know, we might have employees that never see each other. So what we try to do is, you know, maybe 4 times a year, we'll take a group of employees just randomly and throw them together, and they'll go for a day. Generally, it'll be some type of team building activity. A lot of times times we've used like escape rooms, and then they'll have to go to lunch someplace where they don't normally eat. They might go to, a cultural restaurant that they wouldn't normally frequent. And then we always do a volunteer project in the afternoon, and we end the day with, if it's warm out, which is only about 3 months in South Dakota, but they may go get ice cream. But the point of the whole day is to get those people together and get them out of the work environment to where they can just talk person to person and, get to know each other more on a personal level, get to know, you've got kids, you like dogs, that type of connection, so that when they do come together in the large settings where we have all employees, you don't see that, what I always call the junior high dance phenomenon, where I'll never forget when I first got to Sioux Valley, my first meeting, I stood up and I was ready to speak, and I looked around the room, and what I saw was all the linemen and male employees on one side of the room, all the office workers and all other female employees on the other side of the room. And I said, wait, we got to stop right here. Everybody get up and move. And mix them up, because we kind of had that phenomenon. It's human nature. We kind of fall into patterns by nature, and so everybody'd come in the meeting and sit where they always had. So we actually made that part of our meeting planning, where we now have a committee that plans the meeting, and seating is part of it, down to that level, to make sure that we have people sitting next to each other that don't always interface. So we start having those interactions within the organization. We've done wellness committees, buildings and grounds committees. And actually, another story I'll tell you real quick is we changed our mission statement a few years ago, and I wanted the employees to be part of that. So it's a long story, but I'll just tell you, we took that 2 focus groups by department across the organization and really let them decide. And ultimately, what bubbled up was about 5 choices for mission statement. We ultimately let the employees vote on, what do you want this organization to be about? What do you think you're here to do, more or less? And they voted on it, and we took the mission that they voted on to the board and had a discussion with the board, and the board supported it. That's how our mission became serving our members, always. It's a very simple mission. What I'm most proud of it, I think, is that I don't think even our new employees, it's so simple that they know it. I don't think we have a person in our organization that can't recite what our mission is. And they use it for taglines on emails. They use it on almost everything. They're proud of it. They're bought in because they were a part of it. And that's all part of building that culture of involvement and engagement. And Scott, I don't mean to ramble too long on you, but as far as leadership, we continually try to develop internal leadership. I went to my HR department probably 5-6 years ago, and I said, I want a leadership program within this company, and ultimately it led to us hiring a training and development specialist whose first task was to develop that program, and I wanted it to be a program that supported our organizational objectives and our culture. It just wasn't an off-the-shelf program. It was built in-house to really enhance, and teach people about our culture. And I have a strong belief that you don't have to have a title to be a leader. You can lead in any position that you're in. And part of that class is really teaching people how to be leaders, not in title, but really how to step up and be leaders when the time calls for it. And so that's so important in building our culture, because I truly believe that everybody has a leader in them, not under every circumstance, but when that circumstance arises, it's time for that person to shine. They need to be ready, and they need to understand and have the confidence that they can do it. And that's part of what we try to promote.
That's great. I want to continue this conversation about culture, but first let's pause for a word from our sponsor.
Support for Along Those Lines comes from Power and Tel, presenting this message. Whether you're maintaining fiber networks or exploring deployment, Power and Tel has the products that members need, when and where they need them. Power and Tel believes they go the extra mile to match the right product and solution to your specific needs. Let Power and Tel's value-added services simplify your network deployments. Visit www.ptsupply.com to learn more.
I'm Sarah Peterson from Cooperative Energy in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Delaine, if you could weigh in on some of the stuff that Tim was talking about, are you encouraging that sort of emphasis on culture for the co-ops you talk to? Are you hearing co-ops coming to you saying, our culture's broken, we don't know what's going on, we need some help?
So what I'm really hearing, and by the way, I echo everything that Tim said, because I too used to work for a co-op, and, we did that leadership at all levels, developing a program. And what I love about having it in-house is I like to say that everyone's speaking the same language because they've gone through the same program. When one person goes off and maybe learns leadership or something somewhere else and they come back, they're all excited to try a program, to try things they learned from the program. But other folks are like, what are you talking about? So it is really nice to have it internal. So what I'm seeing is CEOs that they know that their culture isn't necessarily working, especially given all the changes in the industry. They want to understand better, where am I at now? What's my culture like now? So typically they do a culture survey, because if you don't know where you are now and then have the vision of where you want to be, it's hard to get from here to there. So we have discussions around, okay, let's see where you are and what do you want it to be? And then we look at things like you asked me earlier about policies and processes. So we look to make sure that all of that maps to the ideal culture. For example, if you want a culture of innovation and ideas and things, and then putting in 4 layers of approvals for any idea, so that's going to pretty much kill that culture because, your policies aren't complementary to what you want. So that's what we do, is we look at, where do you want it to be? Where are you currently? What's getting in the way? And how can we help build an action plan around that?
Delaine, you mentioned sort of the changes that the industry is going through right now. There's multiple fronts. There's new technologies coming on board. There's new regulations. There are massively changing member expectations. I wonder, Tim, could you talk a little bit about the breadth of change that you're seeing at Sioux Valley and how these developments are impacting how you not only manage your staff, but how your staff sort of does their job?
What I am seeing really changes expectations, not only in our employee base, but in our members. And we are having to become more creative to serve our members. I'll give you an example. We serve in an area where we're around a large urban area in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but we have a lot of rural communities as well. And when you look at economic development, there's a lot of established groups that work on economic development in the more urban area. In the rural area, not so much, but those rural communities are really wanting to improve their communities and their economic development picture as well. So we sat down and we said, how can we help them do that? Because that's something they were expecting from us. And we are just kicking off a program we developed called Revive 2030. And it's a program really to connect those communities with resources that they need for grant writing, for community planning, for placemaking. But, that was something that, 5 years ago we probably weren't thinking about. And it's just a different member expectation out there now. And, that's what I'm really seeing drive a lot of the things we're doing. We reorganized internally and established a beneficial electrification department because we're seeing a group of members out there that is a growing group of members who are interested in beneficial electrification topics, and they're wanting to go electric, and they're wanting to know about EVs and charging infrastructure and electric yard tools like snow blowers and lawnmowers. We get a lot of those questions. So we're having to become much more creative. We're having to re-educate ourselves just because of the forces we're seeing change in the expectations of us.
What about you, Delaine, from a national perspective? What are the impacts of these large sort of systemic changes on the industry?
Well, I think it's similar to what Tim said, that staff are having to really jump in, learn new skills, develop themselves. And I think, too, some states are a little bit further ahead than others in terms of, what the requirements are for renewables and EVs and things like that. So those are probably the ones that are jumping on board a little more quickly, but definitely an opportunity for staff to learn more and develop more. And staff tend to be all about that. They want to, for the most part, either be better at their current job and learn new skills or to grow.
And Delaine, you mentioned this earlier, but electric co-op industry, and I believe the utility industry more generally, is going through these sort of waves of retirements. I think the last thing I read was about a third of the co-op program is going to be eligible to retire in about the next 10 years. And that might be a little high, but are you seeing a little anxiety about that in the program? And what are you telling folks about how to replace these people who basically are taking decades of knowledge with them?
Well, I think what we're doing is we're doing a lot of succession planning. We're doing it at the organizational level, and we're including that knowledge transfer piece so that when people do leave, that critical knowledge isn't lost. And I think we also see it at the board level because the boards are like, oh no, I'm going to have to recruit another CEO. So we do a lot of CEO succession planning. And a lot of that is really just defining what it is exactly they want in their next CEO, because it's going to differ a little bit co-op to co-op. And then putting a plan in place to develop internal staff, or it could be a choice that they make to look externally as well. So that's where it seems like we're seeing a lot of activity. I know that I looked at a chart recently and it was approximately overall, all job groups, 25%, roughly 25% in the next 5 years.
That ought to trigger the anxiety.
Scott, on the local level, a lot of the things we do culturally, leadership development-wise, employee development-wise, are to address this issue that we have there, not only retention, but that turnover. A few years ago, we were going through experience where we looked at this and realized this about 5 years ago, we were going to have about a 50% turnover in our accounting department, just one department within our cooperative. And it's a smaller department, but one of them was our CFO. So to prepare for this, we started making plans early, and we hired an assistant CFO well before that CFO retired. So we had a continuity in that position. We also hired another accountant before the second retirement, and we started doing extensive cross-training within the group, and we started cross-training amongst 3 different departments, and we shifted some duties and whatnot. But you may have a few extra employees for a short amount of time, but it pays off in the long run to do that early planning, and those few hours you spend on a little extra labor for that short period of time, for the continuity you get and the service you get to your internal and external customers by not losing that knowledge as it walks out the door, it pays off in spades.
Yeah. I want to get a sense of the way that co-ops may be specifically adept at dealing with the challenges that industries across the country, across the world are dealing not only with the pandemic, but with aging workforce and changing technologies. I'll start with you, Delaine, and then Tim, you can weigh in. What makes co-ops particularly good at adapting to these really massive and disruptive changes?
Well, I think that, when you think co-op, you think community, right? So they already are a big part of the community. I think also co-ops have an advantage because what folks want in a workplace is a purpose, and co-ops have that, right? They got that locked down. And when you have co-ops with great cultures, like Tim was saying, that is a huge attraction because folks want to work at a place where the culture is positive, where it is inclusive, it is collaborative, and they are looking for more than money. So I think that co-ops have a lot of attractive aspects to them that can attract great candidates.
What do you say, Tim?
Well, I think the thing that makes co-ops very unique is that we, for the most part, live and work within the communities we directly serve. Because of this, our employees truly care about providing great service to the members. Keeping the lights on is important. Our product's really no different than that of a Muni or an IOU. It's our exceptional service and our genuine care for our members that really sets co-ops apart. It's our desire to see our members and their communities really thrive that makes us different. Employees care about their communities. They care about their neighbors. They want to help make those communities better in any manner that they can. And this may mean, working extra hours during storm situations or volunteering at the local food bank. But community engagement, our employees are just so into helping these communities. And it's a difference, and I've worked at an IOU. I always tell people, I wish I would have come to the cooperative world so much sooner, because at the IOU, I felt like I was working at a job. At a cooperative, I feel like I'm serving a noble mission to really help people. It's more than just delivering electricity.
That's great. Tim, Delaine, thanks so much for being on. That was a really great conversation. I learned a lot, and I thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having us on.
Thank you for having us. Absolutely. Anytime.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, Power and Tell. For more on this and other podcasts, visit electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Casey Jarvis from Canadian Valley Electric Cooperative in Seminole, Oklahoma. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.